While Democrats unveil impeachment charges against the President of the United States, Donald Trump is setting up for a win on trade. Here's some other stories today you might want to pay attention to. We take a look at where the 2020 candidates stand on campaign cash. We're getting into the details of the DOJ's investigation into the investigation with a reporter who knows. And anti-abortion advocates win big in the courts. I'm Jamal Simmons. Here's why you should care. It just gets more and more expensive to run for president. According to Fortune magazine, the last time there was a race against an incumbent president in 2011, Republicans and Democrats had raised $281 million by December of that year, on the way to spending $1.4 billion by the 2012 election day. This year, the candidates collectively raised $654 million by September, and who knows where it will end. While Donald Trump's campaign has raised $165 million so far, all the Democrats combined have swamped him, raising over $475 million between them. These days, everyday people are joining the millionaires and billionaires funding campaigns. Both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have sworn off attending high-dollar fundraisers, and most of their money is coming from small individual donors. Bernie has raised $74.5 million this way, and Warren raised over $60 million. Of course, campaigns are raising money from the typical sources too. Pete Buttigieg and Joe Biden have fundraisers all over the country where people bundle large donations from wealthy donors. Buttigieg has raised $51.5 million that way, and Biden about $38 million. The former vice president has gotten cash from 26 billionaires and 18 of their spouses. One more twist for the Dems. 2 billionaires are running, and they are largely self-funding. Almost all of the $49 million in Tom Steyer's accounts from his personal kitty, and according to CNBC, Mike Bloomberg has already spent $57 million of his own money on television ads. That's twice what Kamala Harris even raised. After Harris dropped out of the race, Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey has been making the point that not a single person of color has made the cut for the next Democratic debate. Since beating that drum, Booker has raised over $1 million to help him qualify. Now, why you should care? Where candidates get their money, it matters. Do they raise it from people you might meet at the coffee shop or people who hang out at the country club? And is self-funding that great of an idea, or does it skew things toward rich people just running themselves? The primaries are coming, folks. You get to have your say soon. The investigators have been investigated, and it looks like the FBI is not guilty. Yesterday, the Department of Justice released the results of the Inspector General's investigation into the 2016 Russian election interference investigation. The IG report found FBI agents were not motivated by political bias in opening investigations into associates of the Trump campaign in 2016. There's a little bit more to it than that. The president has some different ideas, and so does the Attorney General. Here to help us break it down is the Hill's White House reporter, Morgan Chalfant. Morgan, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
It's good to see you. So the report found no direct evidence of political bias, but the Attorney General made a statement yesterday that adds some more context to this.
Right. The Attorney General came out really disputing one of the larger findings of one of the key findings of the investigation, which was that it was justified. He said that it was generated an intrusive effort investigating the Trump campaign that was generated on the thinnest of suspicions that he said did not adequately pave the way for the steps that were taken. So he is there kind of putting distance between himself and the Justice Department Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, who concluded that the investigation was adequately predicated, that the FBI had a reason to investigate Russian interference and authorized purpose, as he said in the report.
But the FBI didn't get out of this with no blemishes. I mean, they got a couple of black eyes here. What was in the report the FBI should pay attention to?
That's the interesting thing about the report is that while it, kind of debunks these conspiracy theories and these allegations that the effort to investigate the Trump campaign was driven by politically biased agents, it also showed a lot of missteps by the FBI and mistakes. It talks about the mishandling of the warrant application to surveil former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page. It talks about omissions in the application for that warrant and details that were not included and inaccuracies. And so it's clear that the FBI has some work to do. This is, really a harsh criticism of the FISA process, the process through which the FBI applies for these warrants.
And what about the Steele dossier, right? This is one of the big things that's talked about as people consider what happened in 2016. Was this driven by the Steele dossier?
Quite a bit on the Steele dossier, and Christopher Steele, the ex-British intelligence agent who compiled that in the report. The report says that the dossier was not the basis for the investigation. It did not generate the investigation, and that the FBI received the information weeks after it had actually opened the investigation into George Papadopoulos and the other campaign associates that you mentioned earlier. So that debunks another one of those talking points that the president and his allies have put forth.
So the Attorney General is not the only person who responded to this story. We also heard from Chris Wray, the new FBI director. He was not FBI director when the 2016 election problems got launched, but he is the FBI director now that President Trump appointed. He has initiated an investigation or some reforms of the FBI after seeing the report, correct?
Right. Wray issued a letter in response to the report saying he had taken over 40 corrective steps that are being instituted at the FBI. He definitely described the revelations of the report as serious, showing issues that the FBI needs to address. At the same time, he said during an ABC News interview, highlighted that key finding that the investigation was justified and it wasn't driven by political bias. So that put him, kind of at odds as others of the president's allies and Barr.
And anything in here about one of the president's favorite topics or favorite targets, the star-crossed lovers, Strzok and Page?
They are mentioned, yes. It describes Lisa Page as not one of the primary drivers of the investigation, and Strzok is kind of exonerated because the report says that the agents were not motivated by political bias. Of course, Trump has often cited text messages between the two as evidence that the FBI was, out on a witch hunt against his campaign. So that was part of the report as well.
And anything about former Director Comey in the report that we should take note of?
He was interviewed. That was what was interesting. He was one of several top officials interviewed. The report really talks more about a lawyer and agents that were working on it. It doesn't really talk all that much about Comey. It does say that the top brass at the FBI kind of was kept out in the dark about a lot of the information that they should have been, alerted to after the FBI found more details about Steele, these omissions and things like that were not put in the application that the FBI should have been aware of.
And lastly, before I let you go, this is not the end of the investigations over at the FBI. The Attorney General has another investigation taking place right now too, right?
Right, yes. The Attorney General, you'll remember back in April, said that he would, institute another investigation into the origins of the Russia investigation. He's tapped the U.S. Attorney in Connecticut, Durham, to investigate and to spearhead that investigation. That is still ongoing. One of the more interesting things, I think, yesterday was that Durham also released his own statement, which is rare. His office rarely comments on any of this. He issued his own statement saying that he also disagreed with some of Horowitz's conclusions as to the predication of the investigation. So it's very unclear what he disagrees with or what the issues are, but it was very, very striking that he and Barr both kind of put distance between themselves and Horowitz while also, complimenting his work and thanking him for the investigation.
All right. Feels like the president's prosecutor shopping around here, looking for somebody to find something on somebody soon. Anti-abortion advocates won a legal battle yesterday. The Supreme Court did not overturn a Kentucky law mandating abortion providers perform an ultrasound on pregnant women seeking care and describe it to their patients. In fact, the Supreme Court didn't even hear the case. Governor Matt Bevin, who lost his bid for re-election last month, signed the anti-abortion measure in 2017. The so-called ultrasound law also requires physicians to play audio of the fetal heartbeat, with no exceptions, not even in cases of rape or incest. The woman must turn her head or request the volume be lowered if she wants. The American Civil Liberties Union challenged the law shortly after its passage, arguing there was no medical basis for it. While the ACLU's challenge won in the lower federal court, its effort was struck down in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, where a Trump-appointed judge wrote the opinion. That court reasoned that the measure provides patients transparency about abortion, why you should care. It's not unusual for the Supreme Court to hear cases where there's a split decision among circuit courts. And so it's curious why I decided not to take this case on. Just a few years back, a Circuit Court of Appeals in North Carolina struck down an ultrasound law that is about exactly the same. Since conservative Justice Kavanaugh took the bench, the Supreme Court has skirted revisiting the Roe v. Wade decision, which protects a woman's right to choose. But the jury will be out in early 2020 when the fate of the landmark ruling will come into question when the court hears a case on the Louisiana anti-abortion law. Thanks for watching Hill TV on YouTube. Be sure to click subscribe and hit the bell so you know when we post new videos. And head to thehill.com for all the latest political news.